All right, welcome back for another episode of ICU Doc Talk. I'm ICU Doctor from TikTok. Thanks for joining me today. Today, I'm going to do things a little different. I'm going to talk about inaccurate portrayal of medicine on TV and movies. Let's look at the tropes, what things that they get wrong, and what it's really like in real life. Here we go. Okay, right off the top. So lots of medical shows. Well, so I'm not like an expert on medical shows. Like, I don't watch all of the medical shows. I've seen, I think I saw a couple seasons of Grey's Anatomy. I've seen all of Scrubs. I've watched some ER when I was younger, but don't really have a perspective of that, as an adult. Let's see, what else have I watched? Certainly House. I watched some of that. House, Doogie Howser when I was younger also. So, I haven't seen like a lot, but I pick up a lot of the kind of classic stereotype things and also movies and shows. So anyway, right off the top is like across the board, every single medical show and movie has sexual tension and flirting and relationships going on that are open or in secret amongst all sorts of medical staff. It's part of the ongoing drama. Now, that's not surprising that these are put into TV shows and movies. It makes for more compelling watching. People love seeing stuff like that. So how often do romances and like overt sexual encounters happen in medicine? I think you know the answer. It's not a lot. This is a completely ridiculous portrayal of how medical professionals behave. Now, to be clear, hospital romances, of course, happen, right? People often date and marry people that are healthcare professionals, and there's nothing surprising about that, right? The people you associate with, that's how people that you date, and that's people that you hang out with and eventually marry. Often, not always, of course. So there's romance, in the medical world, obviously, but it's not. It happens outside of the hospital, right? There's not like overt flirting and all that stuff going on. That's completely ridiculous and completely unprofessional. Now, this brings me to my next point. So I remember there's this ridiculous episode in Grey's Anatomy. So Grey's Anatomy, I saw a couple seasons of that, and then I just stopped watching because it got so ridiculous. No, which isn't to say I didn't enjoy it. It was kind of a guilty pleasure a little bit. Mostly I enjoyed it to see how ridiculous it was in the portrayal of medicine. I was enjoying on that kind of level. So if you've seen the show, there's Katherine Heigl's character. I forget the character's name. She's like in a relationship with a guy who's on an LVAD. He's like in heart failure, and he's on an LVAD, a machine that helps the heart pump, and he's like waiting for a transplant, and she like falls in love with him, right? So she's a doctor and he's a patient, and she falls in love with him, and I actually think that's when I stopped watching the show, is when he was listed to get a heart transplant, but he wasn't going up the list because his LVAD was working, so she cut the LVAD, and that's unbelievable. The fact that that character came back to even be a physician again after that was ridiculous. Right? That's a crime what she did. That she would never be a doctor ever again. It's completely ridiculous behavior. So patient and provider relationships. So that is expressly unethical. That this happens all the time in TV and movies, but that is a completely unethical relationship. For a patient or a doctor, I'll just say a doctor, but a provider also, to pursue a relationship after they've met is completely, it's very unacceptable. Here's the reason. So being a doctor is an elevated position of power in our Western culture, right? So it's the same kind of relationship like a professor and a student or something like that. It's not the same, but it's similar to that. So for a doctor or a provider to pursue a romantic relationship with a patient, that is, it's unbelievably unethical, and that should not be pursued. And if it is, that person should have disciplinary action by a medical board. It is highly unethical. So, and you see this all the time in TVs and movies, and it's even normalized on the screen. Like, oh yeah, that would never ever happen. I've never seen that ever, not once. I'm sure it happens, but it's probably kept very well hidden if people do engage in that behavior. It's totally unacceptable. All right, moving on here. So watching shows. So I remember, I think it was in Grey's Anatomy also. There was the main like surgical resident. I forget her name. It's been a couple years since I watched the show, but the surgeons do everything, right? So they're like intubating patients and Like everything's on them to make all these decisions, and they literally do everything. They're covering like 5 medical specialties at once in one scene. So that's not how that works, right? A surgeon doesn't intubate a patient. Sometimes like an ENT surgeon can, but it's often portrayed like the main medical protagonist, the doctor, whoever it is doing all of these things that would be covered by multiple medical specialties. So and this drives me crazy. This is a constant mistake, and I get it. It's a way of having an easy narrative for an audience to follow, having the same set of characters doing all the same things and to like valorize them and make them heroes. So I understand the narrative choice to do that, but it's totally inaccurate. One of a classic thing you've probably heard of is, so when they shock, on TV, if they're shocking a patient. So those paddles that you bring up, we don't have those anymore. Those are just for theatrics now. When you see them in like a modern TV show, we don't use those paddles. We because they require you put on gel to conduct electricity. We just put on these pads that are they're basically just stickers, these big foam stickers that we put on the patient, and that does the shocking. We don't use paddles anymore. But there's no way the paddles will go out of Hollywood, right? Because that's very dramatic, bringing the paddles and putting them on a patient's chest. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So when a patient flatlines, like their EKG tracing, it goes flat, they get shocked on TV. You don't shock. That's shocking asystole. You don't do that. You don't shock asystole. So you see that constantly. The reason you shock someone's heart, there's several reasons, but it's because they're in a bad rhythm. Their rhythm is in a malignant or bad rhythm that's causing them their heart to not pump properly, and they have low blood pressure. They're in shock or they're dying. So that would you shock like ventricular tachycardia, or you shock ventricular fibrillation, or SVT, supraventricular tachycardia. Sometimes you shock AFib with RVR. These are different arrhythmias that you shock, because what does shocking heart do? It resets the heart. You are inducing asystole when you shock someone's heart. You apply electricity to the heart, and it stops the heart. Asystole is the heart stopped. So shocking the heart, you're literally shocking. You're trying to stop a heart that's already stopped. It doesn't make any sense. You don't shock asystole, and you see that all the time on TV. Another one that has to do with like CPR is doing chest compressions, and I get this one. They can't do it. The chest compressions always are nothing. Like the characters will put their hands in the patient's chest, and they'll just kind of like do this like little massage. Chest compressions in real life are much more violent. And I understand you can't do chest compressions on a live actor because you would break the ribs. Literally, you would break the ribs. And in fact, if we not that we intend to break ribs, but if you're doing chest compressions appropriately on a patient, you are breaking the ribs. So after, we get someone awake, we expect their ribs to be broken because that's how deep you have to push. So chest compressions on TV always look very weak, and they would not be effective at all. But I'll let that one slide. I do get that. Let's see what else. So paperwork is not really shown on TV, the amount of paperwork that doctors do. So, and different doctors do different types of paperwork. It's a huge part of the job, unfortunately, because a lot of billing comes from doing the appropriate paperwork. So doctors and providers spend hours and hours doing paperwork. I do paperwork every day. I write notes and stuff like that. As an anesthesiologist, my paperwork is actually the burden of my paperwork is actually quite lower than the average doctor. If you think about like a primary care physician, or an outpatient doctor, or a psychiatrist, they have to explain a lot more in their writing, and they deal with a lot of outpatient issues, patients calling in, a lot of stuff that I don't have to deal with because I'm an inpatient doctor, right? I only take care of patients inside a hospital. So, but then when I'm in the ICU, because I do both, right? I do anesthesia and ICU. I have to, for every patient I see, I have to write a daily progress note. I have to write a H&P, which is a history and physical note when they first come in. I have to write notes for every procedure that I do, documenting all those things. That's how the hospital bills, is off of my notes that I write. So it's important for that. And that's like rarely portrayed in TV, right? Why would you show a doctor writing a note on TV? I mean, every now and then, yeah, of course, but it's a much larger component of the job than you would think. So medical shows, particularly like House, they love to talk about medical mysteries and finding the right diagnosis. And that's very exciting TV. Someone has mysterious illness, and you try, and they're usually portrayed like sleuths. Like I think on House, which I didn't watch a whole lot of House, but I think I remember like they seemed like they were like part of the CSI team. Also, they would like go to patients' houses, and they did all these weird, inappropriate things that a doctor would never do. And then it's always like one single doctor that's finally figuring out within the 45-minute time allotment, what the diagnosis is. Medical mysteries can take months to solve, weeks to solve, or they're not solved at all. And that's extremely common. Medical mysteries abound all the time. There's so many things that we do not know. I mean, there's just so many things. There's many things that we do know, of course, many, many things. But someone comes in and you're like, what is going on? And honestly, in critical care, my job is to stabilize patients and get them out of the ICU alive. And they definitely can have stuff that's going on that I have not been able to figure out while they're under my care. Once they're stabilized, then you have a whole host of specialties that are trying to figure out what's going on. Like rheumatologists, they're extremely important for a lot of connective tissue disorders. And you have your nephrologists and your pulmonologists and your cardiologists and all these specialties that combine together, diligently and communicating together to really figure out what's going on with patients. And that can take a very long time. And sometimes medical mysteries often are not solved at all. So that's, it's a little too streamlined on TV. So TV depicts doctors constantly being at the bedside of patients. Now, this is one of those things where I wish that's what it were like. I wish doctors were always there. But it's a little inaccurate. It's nurses who are, let's just really cut to the chase here of what I'm saying. It is nurses that are literally taking care of you. It's nurses. It's not doctors that are doing the literal care. So doctors are leading the care, right? And they're making decisions, about where to go with the care. But who is physically taking care of you and is at your bedside always? It's your nurse. It's your nurse. The nurses run the hospital, and the nurses are actually literally taking care of patients. So I wish doctors were involved in more bedside care. I try to be by the bedside in the ICU as much as possible, but I'm constantly pulled away all the time. So I don't think it's like doctors' fault necessarily. However, I do think some doctors make more of an effort than other doctors to be at the bedside as much as possible. But, we have a lot of other responsibilities as well. And we get pulled away often. I mean, I'll bounce around from one room to the next, particularly if many patients are unstable, spinning plates, putting out fires, going on to the next thing. And I don't always have time to spend as much time with the bedside getting to know patients. If things are slow, I love to sit and visit with patients in the ICU and talk to them. And I love to ask what they would be doing if they weren't sick, if they weren't in the hospital, what they would be doing. I like to get to know what their pets, if they have pets, their pets' names, so that I can make that connection with them, talk to them about their pets every day, and get to know their families. I wish I had the luxury to always do that, because that's important for patient care. It fosters trust. Trust is incredibly important, right? If your patient doesn't trust you, that's going to get in the way of care. So if your patient sees that you're genuine and that you care and that you make an effort to get to know them, when things go through thick or thin, they're going to trust you to make the right decision, and the decision that they're going to trust you that you are making the decision that's best for them and not best for you. So I wish this is one of those depictions that I do wish were more accurate in real life. Now, kind of on that note, there's sometimes depictions of doctors that are all tough on TV, like tough love, with patients that aren't compliant with things and being rude and that is not cool. That is doctors should not be like that. And that for some reason that's depicted on TV often, and that's not good care. I mean, doctors should be patient, should ask questions, should try to get on the same, find out where that patient is, what their medical literacy is, what they understand about their own illness, what are their values. Integrate all of that into their approach and have good bedside manner. Good bedside manner is extremely important, and this is often, I feel like on TV it's flaunted, to be, to be rude and a jerk is it's kind of valorized by Hollywood, which maybe that is accurate sometimes, because sometimes some doctors can be like that. They shouldn't be like that. And I feel like, medical culture should move in a position where doctors like that should be discouraged to be like that, and should have disciplinary action if they have a pattern that is like that, particularly with patients and staff. It's unacceptable. You can't behave like a egotistical jerk around people. That's unprofessional, and that's bad for patients. Okay, so another depiction is, so doctors do everything to save the patient's life at all costs, right? And of course we do, if it's the right thing to do. So I don't know how accurate TV shows in Hollywood is at portraying, okay, we need to stop because this is bad for this patient. We are causing suffering by keeping this patient alive. We need to stop. And I will tell you, I do this every day when I'm in the ICU. It is almost never the medical team and the doctors that are pushing for a patient to be kept alive when they shouldn't be. It is almost always their family members. And I don't know how accurately that's portrayed on TV. We know when care should. We have a pretty good idea most of the time when care should be stopped, when it's futile, when we reach medical futility, where it's pointless to keep going, the prognosis is awful, the patient is dying, and our medical efforts to keep them alive are harming them and making them suffer. And so we stop. So, doctors are like portrayed as heroes on TV, that they do everything to the last. Like, yeah, we do that if it's medically appropriate. I don't know how often it's portrayed where the doctor's like, we should stop doing this. This is kind of unethical, and we should talk to the family about managing their expectations, and maybe that this isn't the best thing for their loved one. I don't know if I've ever seen a scene like that. Okay, here's one that it bothers me every single time, and every single show gets it wrong. Every single time. And it's depicting what it looks like to give someone medication through a vein. Okay? This is what is depicted every time. TV, all the time. They're like, it's like a syringe full of something. Someone, either the character themselves or someone will take that needle and just jab it right into their muscle and just inject, like in their arm. Like this deep, penetrating needle right down in the muscle and then injecting and acting like that's putting something in their vein, like an IV. It is so absurd looking. When you know what putting an IV in looks like, it is so obviously absurd. Putting in an IV is very superficial. And you don't just jab it straight into the skin at like a 45-degree angle. You come at a flat angle and you approach a vein that is on the surface, and you put in, you advance your needle a little bit, you get some blood drawing back, and then you thread a catheter, and then you have an IV in place. What they're basically doing is an intramuscular injection. On TV, they're doing an intramuscular injection in the forearm, that's not where you do that. That's what it looks like. It bothers me every single time. It's totally nonsense. Okay, and then going back to CPR, right? CPR is depicted all the time. So on TV, they show CPR being often highly successful. Like you get the patient back, you do chest compressions, you run a code blue for a few minutes, and you get the patient back. Now that might be accurate, right? So we do often get patients back when they go into cardiac arrest. It's actually fairly routine, but that doesn't mean the patients have good outcomes. They probably will die anyway. They probably will die later. Those patients now they've suffered something catastrophic. It's not that they just went into cardiac arrest just out of the blue. Some people do, but something wrong is going on with their body, and we might get them back and then stabilize them. But so what they don't show on TV is that person codes an hour later in the ICU and then dies then, right? Or they die 5 days from then. It's just CPR is a very last ditch thing. We do it, but if you are someone who's getting CPR, depending on the situation, if you're like a young person and you have, it depends. If you're young, and you have something that was very acute that's easily reversible, then your outcome will probably be good. But many people just don't have those outcomes, and so CPR it's just not a magic bullet that it's often shown in TV. Okay, so what are some of the most realistic TV shows I have seen? It's weird, and I know a lot of people agree with this. So Scrubs is actually, despite being this zany comedy with a main character who's a total narcissist, and a lot of unethical stuff going on in that show. I love that show. It's actually the stereotypes are kind of accurate, like how surgeons are stereotyped, or anesthesiologists, or internal medicine doctors, or endocrinologists, whatever. The stereotypes are kind of ring true. It's weird. I know it's kind of like a funhouse mirror, this caricature, but the more I've watched that show, I realize that that through their satire, they're actually showing a lot of stuff that is true, and the dynamics. And then a lot of the medical cases seem to be fairly accurate. And a lot of medical shows do have accurate medical cases. Like clearly, someone's been on the writing staff knows stuff about medicine and is presenting medical cases and medical mysteries and things like that. And then the power hierarchy in Scrubs is also kind of accurate as well. As JD is like an intern and then a resident, and he has the attending, what's his name? Perry, who that actor. What a fantastic character. That kind of power hierarchy, although exaggerated, I mean, that is kind of how the power hierarchy is. And then the hospital administrator, what was his name? Kelso, having very different interests that don't really have a lot to do with patient care. That can be true. I don't want to like sandbag.
I found this on the web.
Oh, sorry, my watch is talking at me for some reason. I don't want to like sandbag administration and stuff like that, but there are varying interests and power dynamics that happen in hospital hierarchies. And then the other show that I've seen that I love, and it's definitely my favorite medical show, but I love it. And my wife introduced it to me. It's a Korean show on Netflix called Hospital Playlist. I haven't quite. I think there's 2 seasons. We haven't quite finished the second season because we had a baby and we stopped doing anything leisure. But anyway, it is a really good show. I love all the characters. It focuses on 4 friends that are surgeons. One's a neurologist. I think one's a cardiologist. One's a pediatric cardiologist. Another one's an OB, and another one is like a general surgeon that does like liver transplants. The dynamic of these friends going through med school is awesome, and then it's extremely accurate. It is as far as TV shows go. It is the most accurate medical show I've ever seen. The depiction of like an OR, that is exactly what an OR looks like. Exactly, down to every single instrument. The depiction of an ICU, all this stuff. I think it's filmed at a real hospital in Korea. That I think they're trying to show off the show, like the Korean hospital. But the medical cases and how they respond to things, very good. And then it's just a great show. I absolutely love that show. I highly recommend it. It's called Hospital Playlist, and it's on Netflix. Oh, I wanted to mention, another thing that's great about Scrubs is the nursing staff is much more realistic. The nursing staff is not deferential and submissive. The nursing staff is like, it depicts them, hey, they're running the show. And they're like, giving tips and stuff to the intern and to the doctors, and they have patients' interests in heart. And I love that depiction of nurses and Scrubs. That's another thing that's really great about that show. There's a lot of things that's not great about Scrubs. Kind of like that just pursuit of kind of self. I don't know. The JD character is he's a very selfish character. But anyway, I digress. And I have heard that ER is very accurate. And honestly, I need to go back and watch because I just don't remember it. I remember watching it, when I was like 10 or something. So, and I haven't watched it since then. So, but I have heard that's accurate from a lot of other people. So I should go and revisit that. Okay, let's shift gears here. I want to talk about misconceptions about doctors that just people have in general, that the public has, not just, on TV. So one of the first ones to talk about is a doctor's financial status. Okay, so this depends on what generation you are in. So if you're an older doctor, you likely had less, and this is common outside of just doctors, you had less or no student loan debt burden. Your cost of living was very low. You maybe didn't have any tuition that you had to pay for college or anything like that. And then you get into medicine, and now you're saving money, and you bought a house that's cheaper, relative now, and you had more purchasing power and things like that. So if you're an older generation, like a baby boomer or maybe a little later than that, you definitely were able to take advantage of those circumstances. I don't blame you, of course. What else would you do, of course? But it's a different situation for a newer generation of doctors. It's very, very different. So there's this perception that, doctors are rich. Now, doctors are well compensated. Of course, doctors are well compensated. Much more than the average American, right? The average American job. I would never deny that. And I would never complain about being well compensated. And that's not what I'm doing. But it's not quite as straightforward. So my situation is I had to take out full student medical loans, which was like $350,000, right? And I couldn't pay any of that debt back until I was actually a practicing doctor. I couldn't pay any of that while I was a resident or anything like that. So I'm starting out with a mortgage. And then I had credit card debt because I couldn't live on the resident salary that I was paid. And I lived in cities that were very with very high cost of living. So I start with major debt burden, and then cost of living is higher relative to what salaries are compared to doctors in the past, and then that maybe doesn't pace with inflation, particularly lately. So it's a different financial situation. And not only that, so a doctor spends a lot of time in school where there's missed earnings, right? Where someone or a contemporary peer who didn't go into medicine is making money elsewhere doing something in another profession much earlier on. So there's missed earnings. There's missed savings from buying a home earlier. There's missed chances of like investing and things like that if you're able to do that. So there's earning potential that you also miss out on. Doctors often delay other things in their life, like starting a family, having children, so that they're maybe not saving for those things right up front. So it's a complex financial situation. Now, doctors also, not all doctors are compensated equally, right? So the least compensated physicians are primary care physicians and psychiatrists. They're making 100,000 at the low end, 150 maybe, something like that, if you take it, they could have the same student loan burden as any other physician. So their income potential is not matching what their debt needs and their cost of living needs. And then on the other extreme end example is like neurosurgeons and back surgeons that potentially making like $1 million to $2 million a year depending on where they work. And salaries vary widely across the country. They're highly competitive, different salary markets. The coasts, you get paid less, you have higher cost of living, and just like anybody else. The financial situation for doctors across the board is complex, and it's a trade-off. I do believe doctors should be well compensated. Obviously, I'm biased saying that. Doctors should be well compensated. Doctors sacrifice a lot of their life to do this, and I do believe that the care that they provide is extremely important to society, and I think they should be compensated for that effort. We should incentivize young people to go into medicine, to make the sacrifices, many, many, many sacrifices to go in. Now, having said that, if someone's incentive is purely financial, they likely will be a miserable doctor. They likely will be a very miserable doctor. Because if that is, there are much faster ways to make a lot of money in this life than being a doctor. And if you're showing up to work every day as a doctor and you're like, oh, I cannot wait to make my big bucks today, like that's your motivation, you're going to be miserable. There are much faster and easier ways to make much more money than what a doctor makes in this country, in the United States and elsewhere. So it's a terrible motivation. Another myth is, doctors are always confident, right? Doctors are, just like anybody else. We get imposter syndrome. We have self-doubt. We are like, wait, am I making the right decision? And we reach out to colleagues all the time. And nurses, I reach out to everybody in front of everybody. I do not care. The medicine is not a place for ego. So if something's going wrong with a patient, I ask everybody in the room, what suggestions, what can we do? I don't care if it's respiratory therapy. I don't care if it's a physical therapist, the nurse. I want to hear what everybody has to say, because medical patient care is too complex for one person to know everything that's going on and to dictate decisions from there. So to make up for, we can't always be confident, outsourcing and having all that data as much as possible. But doctors are not always confident. And doctors don't always know everything about what's going on with you. That's why you need to advocate for yourself. You need to push back. You need to ask them, are you sure? Are you sure? What have you done? What is your differential diagnosis? What have you done to figure this out? Could it be anything else? Don't let them let your doctor rest in laurels that they know what's going on. They likely do know what's going on, but doctors are wrong all the time. And that's another myth, that doctors are right, that sometimes Western medicine is kind of thought as kind of being magical, that, silver bullet, but we're wrong all the time. And that's just inherent in medicine, because medicine, as I've said, is like an art form. It's applying the science to the human body, and we get things wrong all the time. Another myth is, doctors have a great lifestyle because, they're so well paid. So that definitely is not always true. There are some professions that are, I think, lend to an easier lifestyle. Now, I'm going to offend some people by what I'm about to say with some other medical professions. There are some medical fields that are easier than others. There's no doubt about that. And I'm going to call out one in particular, okay? And it's dermatology. So dermatology is extremely difficult to get into. It's a very, very competitive residency. It's very well compensated, and it can be a very easy practice, just having clinic 5 days a week, with whatever hours you want, and you're making a lot of money. I do think now, if you're a dermatologist and you're listening to this and you're like, I'm enraged, I would love you. I want to hear what you have to say. Email me, icudrecmo@gmail.com, and tell me how angry you are at what I'm saying and how wrong I am. Because I'm sure I'm wrong. That's my impression. So it depends on what kind of specialty you are. So let's just talk about my specialty. I'm anesthesia critical care. So do I enjoy a great lifestyle? Yes and no. I work a lot. So when I do 7 days of ICU, I'm working almost 100 hours that week. Okay. And then I have a week off after that. But I have and that's built in. That's time built in. It's compensation time. Now, but I have not wasted, but a ton of my life that would have gone to personal life has now gone into my job for a whole week. So it's not like it's time off. I'm now spending days getting things in my home with my family back on track and spending time with my family. And then that week comes up and it's very quick, and then I go back to work. Anesthesia just pure anesthesia can be a good lifestyle depending on where you work. You can have short hours, be well compensated. It just depends. It all depends. Surgeons, I think, have some of the worst lifestyle. Here's the reason why. Okay, here's the exact reason. So me as an anesthesiologist, let's say I'm doing my anesthesia shift. I show up and I'm running my cases. I'm supervising nurse anesthetists. I'm doing three or four rooms at a time. And say it's like, hey, it's 3 p.m. I can have a colleague who can now relieve me, and they take over my rooms, over my patients that I've been taking care of. I go home, and now they are in charge of the rooms. A surgeon can't do that. A surgeon, because it's their patient that they sat down in a clinic and said, I'm going to do this thing, and they are there the entire surgery. And then they have a couple surgeries lined up that day, right? So they can't, it's not shift work for a surgeon. And then when that surgeon does go home, they can be called back in at any moment because maybe something went wrong with their patient. And they don't always have a surgeon to cover it. Often they do. Surgeons do have a call system, a coverage system. They do to a certain extent. But that is a rough lifestyle. That is one of the reasons I did not want to do surgery. And I have a lot of respect for surgeons for taking that burden upon themselves to help patients. So I think that can be a very, very, very rough lifestyle in my opinion. All right, anyway, that's enough of that topic. So I'm going to switch gears here to our book discussion today, and this has nothing to do with anything I've been talking about today. The book I'm going to focus on today is called Border and Rule, Global Migration, Capitalism, and the Rise of Racist Nationalism. This is by Harsha Walia. This book I learned a lot. This book is about immigration, global immigration, how it works. The kind of sticker shock tagline I would tell you from this book is that immigration is actually just legal human trafficking. So this is probably one of the most profound and well-researched nonfiction books that I read last year. It has an in-depth analysis of the root cause of migrant displacement and the subsequent commodification of human labor as a means of controlling a nation's labor force, as well as maintaining ethnic and racial hierarchy. Immigration, legal or illegal, is not an accident, but it's a deliberate tool used by the states for economic, social, wealth, and ethnic control. Both liberal and conservative media narratives present us with like this paradox, right? So immigrants are both needed to revitalize economies, yet they also compete for jobs from native citizens crowding out the job market. So how can both occur at the same time? We get that messaging from both sides all the time. The answer is how the media and state narratives frame immigrants. Western cultures tend to categorize immigrants as migrants or, quote, illegals, refugees or asylum seekers, right? There's these different monikers. We build a construct based on their country of origin, based on their political and their economic pressures, as well as their race and ethnicity. After all of that input, we then spit out a binary narrative about immigrants, worthy or unworthy. The reality, as the author explains, is dramatically different and exposes immigration policies for what they really are, which is mitigation of global human disaster of neoliberal policy fallout. Regardless of this, all media paints a completely racially skewed picture of who is in the U.S. illegally. The largest group of immigrants who overstay their visas are Canadians. In fact, half of all illegal immigrants are from Canada and Europe. So when someone like Donald Trump talks about bad hombres, quote, that's a quote, it is a clear and inaccurate racist dog whistle politics to scapegoat Mexicans and to rile up his racist base and to gain electoral advantage. racial panic is foundational to not only Trumpism, but the politics of Netanyahu in Israel and Modi in India, just to mention a few. The name of the game is this: scapegoat the impoverished and the destitute, and leverage that animosity into political and legislative power. And while he certainly capitalized on it, caging children and detaining families did not start with Trump. Bill Clinton opened the door for harsh immigration policies, and both Bush and Obama perpetuated the same policies. Many Trump supporters seem to forget, or they didn't know to begin with because of their propaganda, that Obama was responsible for massive deportation and child detainment, ushering an all-time high of illegal deportation. Trumpists already had their anti-immigration savior in the form of Obama. They just didn't realize it because they were blinded. Additionally, while being honored as a Nobel Peace Laureate, Obama was dropping 26,000 bombs on Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and creating death and massive displacement. The U.S. has never actually been a melting pot of culture and has always been a nation of white Euro-ethnic conquest over black and brown cultures. The U.S. was quite literally founded upon a genocidal empire, and the current immigration policy is an extension of this legacy. Neoliberalism, which is mass privatization, business deregulation, and social austerity, is what causes immigration displacement in the first place. In the U.S., people aren't just showing up at the Mexico border because they've made some bad career decisions and now seek more economic opportunity in the U.S. This is what conservative media would have us believe, that it is their choice to show up at the border, and thus they deserve whatever harsh consequences that await them, whether that is sexual exploitation or death. The liberal narrative is hardly better than this. What they say is, in our benevolence, we have created a work program for, quote, worthy migrants to obtain economic prosperity by stripping them of worker rights, paying them less than a living wage, and denying healthcare coverage, all while exposing them to sexual exploitation and threatening them with deportation if they don't work 18 to 20 hours a day. While the conservative brand of immigration is like an abject human rights violation, the liberal brand is human exploitation and marginalization, all while providing a pop-off valve for the labor economy. So, as I said, neoliberal globalization is the cause of migrant displacement and migrant exploitation. It's a multinational corporate merry-go-round of human misery and exploitation. This is occurring in all major countries, from the US to the EU, India, Australia, Canada. All rich countries are complicit. So, there's these zones set up called export processing zones, EPZs, where labor is performed under a suspension of environmental and labor laws, where the impoverished are exploited for their labor. Worldwide, 27 million people, 90% of whom are female, work in EPZs, where they are not paid a living wage, they labor in poor working conditions, and have no benefits. EPZs are great for U.S. consumption and corporate wealth by having lax regulations and duty-free taxing, by creating unbearable working conditions that force displacement and mass immigration. In this way, consumerism can be seen as the driving force for mass displacement to begin with. EPZs are the author of dispossession and are proliferating around the world. Climate change caused by neoliberal forces also cause mass displacement, and the UN or other countries do not recognize climate change displacement as a legitimate need for asylum of refugees, which it obviously should be. Speaking of neoliberal corporate control, immigration detention camps are privatized. Let that sink in. 75% of detainees are in privately owned facilities. This is a morally reprehensible practice, literally puts a dollar of value on immigration detainees. So by selling government contracts to companies like GS4 and CoreCivic, human trafficking now becomes a legal practice. CoreCivic grew by 134% after Trump ramped up deportation. A quarter of all CoreCivic's profits are from ICE contracts. Yeah. So in this way, the taxpayer is literally funding a privately owned carceral state where human beings are commoditized, not for their labor, but for their very imprisonment. And make no mistake, detainees are very lucrative. ICE holds $200 million in immigrant bond money. The other side of immigrant detainment is migrant worker programs, wherein immigrants legally enter under a contractual agreement to sell their labor with zero rights afforded. Migrant programs help labor shortages in the domestic job market while being able to deny the rights of citizenship in what becomes a very lopsided agreement. Migrant programs are the liberal, quote, humane approach to immigration for the, quote, worthy immigrant to help them, quote, assimilate. This arrangement is to the benefit of the country of origin as well, as it helps their economy siphon off unskilled labor surplus. Under the threat of deportation, legal immigrants work longer hours with less sleep, less food, and low wages. There is nothing humane about legal migrant programs. They are only a way for the native country to control key labor markets and also racial demographics to make it culturally prohibitive to ever be part of the citizenship and always be viewed as foreign. Military contracts like Blackwater use migrant workers in this way. Migrant programs are essentially state-sanctioned indentured servitude with the impact of legalized segregation and racial stratification. It is also the flip side of outsourcing, neoliberal insourcing that brings cheap labor domestically to exploit foreign workers. The aim of legal and illegal immigration is to create a stateless populace. Think about that phrase, a stateless populace. Trump rescinding DACA was a classic move of creating a dispossessed people to deny citizenship and act aloof about where they should go. Muslims all over the world have suffered this stateless existence, especially in India and China. Immigration is not something that just happens to developing countries. It is a state tool used to control the workforce and the racial makeup of its people by subsidizing a privatized carceral state. Make no mistake, some men somewhere are profiting greatly from the incarceration of the dispossessed. It's an amazing book. I learned, it's incredibly eye-opening. I've never learned so much about immigration in my life from reading it. Again, it's called Border and Rule, Global Migration, Capitalism, and the Rise of Racist Nationalism by Harsha Walia, W-A-L-I-A. All right, I think that'll wrap up this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening to the end, if you are still here. If you have questions that you would like me to answer on the podcast, email my email account, icudrecmo@gmail.com. icudrecmo, E-C-M-O @gmail.com, and I will prioritize answering questions from that email account than from like TikTok, because I know I'm answering questions from people that listen to the podcast, most likely. And then you can follow me on TikTok. My handle is ICUDoctor. You can follow me on Instagram. It's ICUDoctor TikTok. Let me know if there's anything you want me to do for this different for the show. I'm going to try to have guests more often, so it's not just an echo chamber of me, which gets kind of tiring, I'm sure, for you listening and for me as well. So yeah, that's it. Thanks. Bye.